Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast. My name's Clark Massey. I'm here in Kansas City. You see my red 1978 wheel horse lawn tractor in the back, my pride and joy. And then we've got Laura Heeman in Maryland and Washington, D.C. on the other part of our podcast. That's a weird way of saying it. Hey, Laura. All right. We have a super ambitious podcast today. Most of our podcasts are about an hour, and it just seems like we're done in an hour, even when we're not even trying to hold it to that. But we're going to go over the 800-page Pennsylvania grand jury report on sex abuse in the Catholic Church. We're also going to discuss multiple cases, and I'm going to go into what we're doing. And I think we're just going to give you a ton of content so you can make up your own mind about what you think the causes were of the sex abuse crisis in the church, what you think the solution is, and how you weigh all of this in forming your opinions. First, we're going to go high level. What is a grand jury report? Why was this called? Any critiques at just that level or understanding of it at that level? We're going to go over what we identified in our last podcast on the basics of the church sex abuse crisis as the causes. We're then going to go through the reform real quickly that was made after 2002 and the Boston Globe broke the crisis. Then we're going to talk about the causes laid out by the Pennsylvania grand jury report. And compare them to our opinion of what the causes were and see what we learned from that. The other part of the Pennsylvania grand jury report is that they came out with a few legal suggestions. We're going to review those and talk about our opinions of those suggestions. And at that point, we're going to talk about some of the fallout and other things that happened in the church after this. There's kind of the interesting case of Donald Wuerl, Cardinal Wuerl out in D.C., who was forced into retirement because of this report. There's the case of Bishop Finn out in Kansas City. Laura and I both knew Wuerl, and I knew Finn. And within the case of Bishop Finn, it's an interesting time to talk about how church politics and stuff affect these types of sex abuse cleanups. And then we're going to talk about the strange case of someone who Laura and I have kind of known and met multiple times, Monsignor Rossi out in Washington, D.C. And the final thing we might mention is how this problem is going to affect the international church eventually, if not already. So, All right. Are you ready, Laura?
I'm ready.
All right, let's go.
Do you want to tell us about what a grand jury is?
Yes, thank you. All right. So a grand jury is a group of citizens who gets together to review evidence to see if there's something there worthy of an indictment or worthy of action by the government. And in this case, these people gave up 2 years of their life, to do this. And that's just amazing.
And it's just a collection of people that are selected through the normal jury duty process. That's
my understanding. I don't think it's the same. In normal jury duty, you get to kick a lot of people off of jury, for a variety of reasons. I don't know that's the case in a grand jury because I don't know that the other side is represented in a grand jury. I think it's the prosecutor just kind of running it. And that kind of comes into why grand juries are a little bit strange or something like this. There's something about this report that when you look at it, if you just Google grand jury report Pennsylvania, there's a lot of grand jury reports in Pennsylvania, but this is the one that has its own website. This is the one that has its own victim videos. This is the one that has its own. There's just something about it that was motivated by either national politics, state politics, whatever. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just saying that that's just a reality. It's also a reality that this stuff comes from the Attorney General's office.
Yes.
And that is a political position. It's either appointed or elected. But there's also the issue that that's a prosecutor. Fundamental role of a prosecutor is to win cases, not to be fair.
Something I would point out is that there were Catholics on the grand jury.
Yeah. I also I know how hard it is to write well. And this 800-page report is really well written and just kind of to the point. And I thought, how did a group of people do a writing project and have it come out this well? I mean, there had to be some major editor or a lawyer who was putting this together for them. It's easy to read for good or for bad. So there's another type of critique of this. What did you want to say something about that, Laura?
Yeah, this is partly a critique. I want all of this to come out, but not just about the Catholic Church, right? It needs to happen with all the institutions that we have. And, you know, we've seen this with like Boy Scouts. Some of this stuff is coming out. We need to see this in the public schools. The Catholic Church report brought some kind of shocking statistics to my attention. And I'll say two of them about the public schools. One survey found that there were 290,000 students in a decade, 1991 to 2000, abused by educators or school employees. Another study commissioned by the DOJ found that 10% of students will experience educator abuse.
And this is public school, right? Or
in public
Catholic
schools,
school?
yeah.
Okay.
These were just public school statistics, and I found those numbers shocking. And I went to public school growing up.
I did too.
Yeah, and so there's 50.7 million public school students. 10% of those students will, estimated will experience educator abuse. And I don't want to deflect from the church. I think the church needs to have all the accountability and everything. But to put that into perspective, in a 50-year period, an independent study found that there were 10,667 individuals abused in the church.
10,000 versus 290,000.
Yeah.
And the 290,000 is one decade, and the
10,000
is 5 decades. Is that right?
Now, obviously the public school system is huge, right? But then we have like everything is coming out with the Boy Scouts right now, and there were about 90,000 claims that came out against the Boy Scouts in a similar period to the church.
So the take-home point of this is there needs to be more grand jury reports if we want to stop this problem.
Yeah, and we have a problem in the institutions in our country.
And I think that goes well into what we thought the causes of the Catholic Church's problem were, because I think that's one of our big causes. It's just as institutions have this type of problem. But let's go down real quick what we identified as the 7 major causes. First one was the Catholic Church seemed to trust mental health facilities. They treated pedophilia or sexual deviance as like a treatable mental health disorder, not like it was a sin, not like it was a crime. They treated it that way. And they were able to outsource the judgment of it onto some psychologist as opposed to make the decision themselves, because they could just like trust the expert. In hindsight, that's crazy. At the time, I think there was a little bit more room where the public thought that could be also true. But I think in hindsight, we just know that was a terrible idea. And they should have known it then too. And we even have some proof they did know it, because like Cardinal O'Connor was like, I just don't trust these reports. The second one was there were systems. We believe that one of the causes was the systems were in place where priests were judging priests. There weren't lay people there. They were overly trusting the priests. There was kind of a clericalism problem of the laity not wanting to question the priests, and also some careerism within the church, where people felt like they had a right to their assignments, to their bishoprics, to their pastoring. And you couldn't take that away from me without like some huge amount of proof or whatever. Third cause was they were transferred instead of laicize these priests and kick them out. Fourth problem was there was an awareness issue. Just people weren't aware of how big a deal it was, partly caused by the church not being so open with when they caught it, Another issue is that there is just a certain fraction of the population that has pedophilia impulses, and it's not clear that it's any higher within the priesthood than it is amongst men in general. And the estimates are between 1% and 5% of men have this issue. And then I think the last two, I think, are the two biggest ones in my mind. Like, one is that if you run institutions, you're going to have an abuser problem. If your institutions have one group having more power than another group, you're going to have abusers, And if you do not have good investigations, good methods, good management techniques to keep that in check, you are going to have a complete disaster. And it doesn't matter if it's a prison or a mental health ward or a hospital or an orphanage or a school or a parish program or a camp or whatever, you're going to have huge problems, or a police force even, right? And if anybody who ran any of those institutions, and if I ever said, hey,
what do you do about abuse? And they go, well, we don't have that problem. I'd be like, oh boy, you must have it worse than everybody else.
Right. This is an aside, but this just reminded me of like one year we grew to a lot more volunteers at a Simple House, and it was like 7.
Right.
And we realized it was hard to keep tabs on what ministry people were doing, and it was like, 7 people, and weirder things were happening because it was,
Right.
the growth. Right. And so that's just another inherent problem with institutions. They're large.
Yeah.
You
I've
can't
seen
have-
that naivety where like Catholic lay people will say, why doesn't the bishop do the such and such with Father so-and-so? And it's like, well,
Right.
there's about 150 priests in this diocese. I have a hard time keeping tabs on like 8 missionaries.
Right.
And I'm pretty darn involved. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's just a certain level of control, but that's the whole art of management. You know what I mean? And that's why you need management systems and dispersed responsibility and different things like that. And in some ways, the church was really bad at that. I keep
Right.
weighing this, like, the church has existed 2,000 years. There's no other management structure that has survived that long. They must be doing something right. And the church looks terrible in any management 101 class for just really basic errors.
Right.
Both are true.
Yep.
And then it's our final cause, but also what we consider one of the 2 top causes, is that the church has been kind of being run on a familial ideal. The whole idea of pastorship and bishops and things like this, it's kind of like a family position more than a normal management position, like a CEO. And it means like everyone has a family where there's probably someone in the family who's not living up, who might even be an abuser or have an addiction or whatever. And it's not like you get a new dad or you get a different mom. That's just your mom. And until they die, they're your mom. And if they have problems, they have problems.
Right.
And same with like kings. If you lived in some country that had a bad king, you're kind of sitting around waiting for that person to die.
Yeah.
And that was basically the church's model too. We didn't have systems like management 101 systems to just root out people who needed rooted out.
Right. And when you become a priest, it's not like, job interview, you get a job for a certain amount of time, right? Like you're literally giving your life over to the church.
Right. I've been thinking about that a lot, like with, life expectancies increasing, that we're making priests when they're like 26 and they've got a 50-year career ahead of them, and there's going to be some ups and downs in their faith in those 50 years. It's just an interesting problem to have. I'm not saying there's a theological reason to change it. It's just daunting to think that you can know at 26 what somebody will be like when they're 60,
Right.
All right, now let's talk about the reforms the church made, just so we all have hope. I'll peek ahead and say the Pennsylvania grand jury thought these reforms were mostly successful. We stopped listening to the mental health experts. There was a reform of the seminaries from the Vatican. We go into more of this in the basics of the church sex abuse crisis, our previous podcast. There was a zero tolerance attitude adopted by dioceses for credible accusations, which is a very low bar of evidence. So if you have a credible accusation, done, removed, right? They're going to go to the police first, not last, with the accusations or the credible evidence they have. There's going to be aggressive disclosure outside the church, even beyond the statute of limitations. Like I know for a fact in Missouri that all of the files are open, even if there's no possible criminal charges or civil charges that could be brought, they just open the files of anything they have. We put lay people and ombudsmen and other processes in place management-wise to weed out, that's not priest judging priests, and there actually is a whole report process and investigation process now. There's an awareness campaign and training for lay people to work with children or to even go to Catholic school. You have to go through it. And that's the major reforms. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think just to expand on the awareness campaign idea, it's like, it's, this like multiple hour-long program where they teach you, like, this is what grooming looks like, this is what sexual abuse looks like, really.
I don't know that the program works so well. I don't say that from any evidence at all. It's just like you go to the program and you kind of, I just not convicted it's that is the answer. Having said that, it's very telling to me that like these programs, I think in public schools and everywhere, didn't really come about until like the 80s,
you know, like because
Yeah.
there's different names for these programs, like safe touch, bad touch, good touch, bad touch, type stuff, right?
Yeah.
I just don't think
You
these
know-
were around in the 60s.
Right. I mean, these programs came after 2002, and when I did
No, they didn't actually. They didn't.
Oh,
Like the church sex abuse awareness programs were in the 90s.
and they were required for people.
Well, one thing we need to mention is the church is broken up into dioceses. Dioceses have autonomy.
Okay.
So
okay.
there's no way to
So
say it
there
was nationwide, every single diocese.
Yeah, but there were
it was widespread before 2002. There was this awareness. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to say when I did like my training in the diocese of in the DC Archdiocese, I was kind of like sitting there thinking like, oh my gosh, who doesn't know this, you know? And then we have like these breakout groups. And there was a young guy that had been asked to help with his youth group, and he was just like wide-eyed, like, I had no idea, you know? So that was interesting. And another thing that I think is like, we all understand what sex abuse is, but I think that a lot of people did not know about grooming behaviors.
Yeah, I think the grooming behaviors discussion is interesting for a weird reason too, in that it kind of alerts you that, like you shouldn't be going around tickling kids. But like, maybe you're not a pedophile and you tickled kids. Now you know. Don't do that, because that's a grooming behavior. You know.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to the Pennsylvania grand jury report.
Yeah.
Okay, the Pennsylvania grand jury report clearly believes that 2002 was a watershed moment.
Mm-hmm.
Divide up all their analysis pre and post 2002. All right. 2002 is what our previous podcast was about. It's when the Boston Globe broke this story. That story is not really about Boston. It's about the nation, right? Just the Boston reporters busted it in Boston diocese, right? So this report says there were 7 causes of this pre-2002. And that's kind of what this report's about, is mostly pre-2002 stuff. And even stuff much older than that, like 50 years before that. It had 7 causes, and let's go through these one by one and see if we identified the cause and if we agree with their analysis.
Sure.
The first thing they said was the church would deal with sex abuse only using euphemisms.
Mm-hmm. Like inappropriate contact, or this priest is on sick leave.
Well, yeah, that doesn't even sound like a euphemism to me.
Well, if you're going, I don't know, saying somebody is on sick leave because you're going to like mental health.
Okay, that is a euphemism.
That's a euphemism. Yeah. And inappropriate contact is a euphemism. If that's a euphemism for fondling a child, I mean, those are euphemisms.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with this in the report. I think it also has to do with the awareness stuff, that as people have become more aware, gotten better language. Like when we reviewed the McCarrick report, there was that mother who knew something strange was happening, wrote a letter, but didn't have the language in which she claimed she didn't even have the language in which to express what was happening, you know? Yeah. So I think this is very much true, and I agree with the report. And I think it kind of coincides with our own analysis under prior awareness.
Right.
Okay. The second point was that the church had no quality investigations of these accusations. I think this I also agree with. I think we listed it a little bit separately. We talked about priests judging priests. We talked about the family model. One of the things we talked about that I think they're talking about too is that there was kind of a concern that the accused also have rights. There's not just victim rights. You know, there's also the accused rights. We were honoring the accused rights, making sure there weren't the false accusation, and we weren't taking that darn seriously the victim's rights. You know,
right.
So I think that's part of this no quality investigation. So I'd say they were right. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that we saw that in the McCarrick report a lot.
Agree. I agree. Psychiatric, there was a treatment bias that they thought that this stuff could be treated through mental health professionals. That's almost verbatim. Yeah. That's almost verbatim our point, you know, so that's good.
I thought, though, that the way it was worded, you know, it emphasized that the church was paying church psychologists, you know, and it was treating it as like a specific church problem, which it was a specific problem in the church, but I think it was a society-wide problem too.
I agree. I do think that
they're valid to say, though, that maybe you're not getting independent opinion from some of these psychologists that are being employed by the church to do the work, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And that's true. And we didn't identify that, but I think they're right. But either way, this needed to not be treated as a mental health problem. It needed to be treated as a crime problem, essentially. Next point they made, their fourth point was there was no public disclosure for reasons for removal. I think this is similar to the euphemism thing, but it'd be like, father's gone now. No one knows why. Let's assume the best. Moving on,
Yeah.
But that's bad for victims because other victims aren't stepping forward because there's no acknowledgement there was a problem.
Right.
And
it sets father up to victimize others. Yeah.
Right. Therefore, he's not getting publicly accused, and therefore he can keep operating. All right. I agree with their problem. I don't think we talked about it that much. I feel like I kind of agreed. I mean, I've always thought they were handling it like it was a PR problem.
Yeah.
And that's very consistent with their point here.
Yeah.
All right. Their next point was that the church continued to financially support these priests. I'm going to defend the church, then I'm going to attack the church for this. At some level, these priests were not guilty in a court of law. And even if they were totally removed from service, the church kept paying them and giving them health insurance and things like this. And part of that seems right because, there's maybe a credible accusation, but there's not like, they're not guilty on any legal standard, right? In another way, though, I feel like this is across the board when people get accused of stuff, people are very hesitant to pull their job or hurt their income. And I think that's kind of stupid. I mean, like, people in our society every day, grown adults, middle-aged people, start their career over.
Yep.
And sometimes start over from broke, like that's common. And for a lot of us, that would be extremely tragic, really hard to understand, right? But like, if you ended up needing to go like work in a mattress store and you used to be a priest, that's just a valid, maybe we know somebody who that happened to. That's just like, go deal with it, buddy. You know what I mean? Like, that's a real life problem that real life people every day have to tackle. And we shouldn't be shy of forcing people to do that.
Right. Maybe a way people would defend doing this is like if a priest has done something that maybe he cannot be penalized by the law because of a statute of limitation, or maybe it wasn't, I don't know, so severe. Or I think when some people would defend the church saying, well, this is a way to keep tabs on the priest and keep him close and not let him run loose.
Well, clearly we don't know how to manage people or keep tabs. So clearly we need to not do that. I think that's just like I think the bishop and whoever had that, there's clearly, the idea you stated is a real idea that bishops have had. Let's keep them under control. Let's put them in a monastery. Let's get them out of the way. It's better for us to control them than for them to be cut loose.
Right, exactly. The report showed that it didn't work in some cases and it did work in some cases.
I'm
not defending the idea. I'm just
I think we have to condemn the idea because you just can't control people like that. I mean, unless you've got a bodyguard on them 24/7, which you don't, you're just not controlling people. Therefore, pretending you control people kind of gives you the responsibility, but you don't really have the power to execute it. I think it's terrible. I think fully cutting them loose is the way to go. I also want to say here that I think the public school abuse problem has a dovetail here where that like the church with a credible accusation, which is a very low bar of evidence, should be able to get rid of you and does, right? In the public schools, you actually have more rights. You have a teachers union to defend you. You actually need a higher bar of evidence to get rid of these people, right? Which I think is going to make the public school abuse problem harder to solve than the church problem. I also think the political will problem that I've been in politics and not run for office, but I've been kind of involved in like commenting and lobbying in the state of Missouri. And the most powerful group in the state of Missouri is the teachers union. And I think that's true of almost every state, So the political will for like the attorney general of a state to go after public school abuse may be non-existent. It's going to be a much harder problem to solve. All right. Shall we go to their next?
No,
I think that was number 5. Number 6.
That was number 5.
the church would transfer, not remove people. 100%. That's the problem.
Yep.
I don't know if that's a cause as much as that is the problem.
Yeah.
Number 7.
And that is also a problem in other institutions, not just the church.
Right. Number 7 is the church would not tell police or would not first go tell police. That is a cause of the problem. That actually is the problem too. Agreed. So
yeah, totally. Yeah.
What of our causes did they miss that we think are similar?
Yeah, I want to say something about the interaction with law enforcement, though. Sometimes they would go to the police with kind of like withholding some evidence. But another thing is that in maybe some cities, there's and some areas, an attitude that existed in law enforcement of deferment to the institution, to the church, to the priest,
right?
Which they identified that.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of an interesting cultural thing that I think is largely gone now in regards to the church.
Right. There's even almost like a clericalism amongst the police officers towards the church. Like they wanted to be good Catholics and things, so they weren't going to go after the church. Right. All right. I think the thing that's missed here, which I'm not really blaming the grand jury because they're just a bunch of citizens forced to spend 2 years studying this, which would stink, you know?
Yeah.
I think that our main 2 issues are not adequately covered, that this is a general institutional problem, and that the church kind of had this familial ideal, which is hard to attack from outside the church. Maybe that's why they didn't. This familial ideal, part of it is probably theological, so maybe you can't change that part. But to whenever possible, we have to have ways of getting out bad pastors, you know, and laicizing priests when necessary. So
yeah, and I don't. Neither of us are familiar with canon law, like what allows you to laicize a priest or defrock a priest or whatever.
And it seems like, according to this report, that this covered all of Pennsylvania except Philadelphia.
No, I'm sorry, and Altoona. It covered 6 of 8 dioceses,
all right,
because they had previously been investigated.
And the grand jury got cooperation from the 6 bishops. They claimed some of the bishops at first were reluctant to cooperate, which I think is because there was a sense that this was a witch hunt, that this was not going to come out well for the church no matter what happened, you know. But they ended up getting all 6 bishops to cooperate. And they came up with 4 reforms they wanted to make. And these are not church reforms like all the previous reforms we've talked about. These are Pennsylvania legislative reforms. So let's go through these and comment on them.
Sure.
The first thing they suggested was that there would be no statute of limitations for the criminal prosecution of child sex abuse. And currently, the statute of limitations was that until the person was 50 years old. So if you're 51 or 55 and you were abused as a child, the state could not use you as a witness to go after a abuser, because the statute of limitations for that crime had existed. So this was adopted by the Pennsylvania legislature, right?
It was completely abolished, yeah.
Yeah, there's no longer a statute of limitations for child sex abuse. I'm okay with that. I don't feel strongly. I do think, though, that our criminal justice system is based on we have to honor the rights of the accused and they have to weigh the evidence. And the further out our whole judicial process goes, like investigating things further and further in the past, the accuracy of our judicial system is going down, you know? And if you're prosecuting child sex abuse, that is, I'm going to say it happened to a 10-year-old, so it could be prosecuted up until he's 60. So that's 40-year-old accusations, you know? It's just hard, you know? Like, I'm not against it if you can do it accurately, but I do worry that we're kind of creating a situation for injustice, possibly.
Yeah.
You know?
The report brought up, like the earliest thing included in the report happened in the 40s. So it was like a priest born in the 1800s.
Who is dead, who can't be criminally prosecuted because they're dead, you know? So, we shouldn't be laughing about that, but
no. But I guess I have sort of the attitude of like, burn the building down if we have to, like, let's get it all out there. But when you say that, it sounds a little bit ridiculous, you know? And
I think it probably depends on the type of evidence too. Like if I had more faith in the judges and the judicial process, and then like if they had like DNA evidence or something like that, 100% go after it. You know what I mean? But I don't know how you get DNA evidence from 50 years ago, you know?
Yeah.
I just don't know if that's even plausible. So next suggestion was they wanted to open up a special 2-year window of civil claims where if your statute of limitations had run out, you could go back and sue in civil court for the next 2 years. You'd have that option. And there'd also been a law change in Pennsylvania where the current law had been, at the time of this report, the current law was that you could start a civil suit up until you're 30 years old for stuff that happened to you when you were a child. Since this report, they changed the 30-year-old time limit to 37. But even before that, in ancient history, stop me if you think I'm erring. The old rule was like, when you turn 18, you have 2 years to file a case.
So, but that's not such ancient history. And I thought this was good. I thought, because it's like, I think there's people that could be in their 30s right now that only had 2 years to report. And you could be in your 30s and be suffering, like your family, your career, a whole lot of things could be suffering right now from something that happened to you as a child. And the idea was you had this stuff happen to you as a child. You're dealing with it. You're barely an adult. You're 20 years old and you find out you can't bring it,
Yeah. I think it takes a while for people to sort themselves out, and I think if you can't articulate the case by the time you're 37, which is the new law, I think that's about right. I mean, you should be able to articulate what happened to you, why it was important for you to be able to sue by the time you're 37. Or maybe.
But so there are currently people that are, in their 30s and 40s that would have had the 2-year thing applied to them.
But particularly this, though, grand jury report mentioned that they wanted to give chances to people in their 80s to have cases, which didn't make much sense to me, because if the perpetrator's alive, they're really suing the church, not the perpetrator. So they wanted to give chances for people really old to reopen it, because back in the day their window was only 2 years, and that seems just to me. Once again, I think the big critique of all this is, if you're going to do that for the church, do that for the Boy Scouts, do that for this should not be a targeted law. This should be a general.
I mean, and it is coming out with the Boy Scouts, but let's the schools, sports, everywhere. So, but this was legislated into Pennsylvania law.
Yes.
Not just about the church.
Right. Oh, it was. It was not targeted. It was general.
It was general.
That's great. All right. There's going to be a clarification of penalties for not reporting future cases. Instead of it being a misdemeanor, it becomes a 3rd-degree felony. I think that's good. That was what happened. So their recommendation was just to clarify what the reporting laws were, because there was some language that said it penalized you for non-reporting of an active abuse case. And they're like, well, what's an active abuse case? If it happened yesterday, is it active? Right.
That's then the legislation clarified some of that and then made it a 3rd-degree felony.
And this will be important because we're going to talk about Bishop Finn's case, and he was actually convicted or settled and was guilty of a misdemeanor for a slow reporting, for a 6-month gap in reporting. So that'll become important there too for the Missouri case. And then the last thing they suggested was that non-disclosure agreements cannot affect criminal prosecution. So if they want to bring someone to the stand as a witness, it needs to be very clear to that witness that any NDA that they signed is not binding. They need to be able to say the truth to help a criminal prosecution. And I agree with that. And where I see that, I before I read this report, I've often thought about that in terms of like star athletes, that there's a lot of NDAs signed there that keep someone's reputation untarnished, when really the thing that was accused is quite criminal, That's always bothered me that was the case. So I agree with all points of the Pennsylvania report. The very first one, we just have to be suspect of really, really old cases, but that's it.
Yeah.
All right.
The non-disclosure agreements, I agree with that as well, as long as there's care for the victims. I think in the past there have been some victims that prefer the non-disclosure agreements for their protection. And so is there, for there to be a way for a victim to move forward with privacy.
Are you sure about that? I've always thought the non-disclosure agreements always protect the accused.
I was reading a little bit about this yesterday. Some lawyers were worried about the non-disclosure agreement stuff because they defend people who prefer them.
Okay. Yeah.
So there need to be appropriate ways for victims to have privacy and not relive the trauma,
that's true, but there's also a
mm-hmm.
darker reason to prefer them. You get a better settlement if you sign them.
Mm.
Like if the accused party, be it the church or the school district or whatever, knows there's going to be no more PR crisis because they can get you to shut up, they will pay you more in settlement. So I don't know what the truth is.
I guess a tricky thing though also could be in a victim's kind of healing of it. Initially, they might prefer a non-disclosure agreement, and then 10 years later say, "I need to speak out about this." So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. I guess you could have a unilateral. I don't know.
Yeah. But anyway. Yeah.
Now let's talk about some of the fallout of this. One of the fallouts was a cardinal that we knew and worked with Simple House, Cardinal Wuerl, got retired.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, when I say someone worked with Simple House, it just means we operated in their diocese and we met them before. I'm interested in...
And he wrote the intro for our book.
Oh, he did write the intro book. We think his secretary did, but he did write the intro to our book, which we thought was fortunate because we didn't choose McCarrick to write the intro of our book, but turned out to still be unfortunate.
Oops.
We're not republishing that book now. So what's the point, though? With Cardinal Wuerl, I think the general case is that he was seen as actually an anti-sex abuse reformer, like taking action, yet in hindsight, he did not take enough action particularly in a couple cases, right?
Yeah.
So even though at the time, kind of his PR was, I'm taking more action than everyone else, and he might have been, I can't actually compare. We actually don't have a good study of what happened to the other, hundreds of bishops, how much action they took. But we did get a really in-depth study of Cardinal Wuerl, and it turns out he didn't do a good enough job in a few cases. There's a huge loss of faith in his leadership, and he ends up having to resign or go into retirement because of it, right? There's no criminal charges against him. As far as I know, there's no independent civil cases that have sued him directly for anything. Mm-hmm. So he's not I don't think it's right to think of him as a perpetrator himself, but still guilty, right? Yeah. Still not, okay.
After the report came out, he put up a website that was called the Wuerl Record or something like that, and it was answering all the claims in the report because I think he thought they were unfair or did not represent well enough his side of the story or the things that he had done positively. And then that was quickly taken down because how tone deaf
it was tone deaf.
That.
I don't really have a big problem with him needing to step down. I just the thing that bothers me in general is that I think a lot of bishops in the 90s nationwide were doing stuff as bad and never had to step down. Yeah. And they were in difficult situations, but still should have done better. I don't know what to say about
a key thing is if you became a bishop in the 90s, you inherited, a whole bunch of file cabinets of problems. And
that had been to put it they'd half-assed been dealt with. You know what I mean?
Nothing was tied up, nothing was closed, it was just there.
Or worse, they said they investigated and the guy got, X consequences and you're that wasn't a real investigation. What is this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Do I have to double jeopardy this guy or what? And it just would have been very unpopular, very dynamite, obviously, and the dynamite ended up exploding on them, But
you kind of wish there would have been the dynamite, but it's the bishops should have all done better. I 100% believe that. But then you try to think about being in his office. How do you deal with that?
Right. But also, say the year's 2010 and not 2021. In 2010, there were a lot of active bishops in America who had been on both sides of the 2002 reform.
Right.
They had been part of the corrupt side and part of the good side. And Wuerl was one of them, right? In
Yeah.
2021, there's not a lot of active bishops that are actually part of the pre-2002 problem,
Yeah.
right? Which is, I'm thankful for that, right? But
Yeah.
Worrell was one of the very last guys taken down on this, you
Yeah.
know? And a lot of guys never were taken down who probably could look at Worrell and say, I did worse, or I did
Yeah.
the same thing,
Sure.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
don't think that's a real defense of Worrell, but it's just to put it in historical context. He's just
Exactly.
one of the only guys from the 90s who got taken down from this, you know? All right.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the case of Bishop Finn. All right. Bishop Finn, I'm going to give a little bit of backstory because I know this story well. He came into the Kansas City, Missouri diocese at a time when the Kansas City, Missouri diocese was not in very good shape and was primarily known for being kind of an unorthodox diocese with really lax teachings and things like this, right? And Bishop Finn kind of came from the complete opposite end of the spectrum, really wanted a much more, a really like inline church. He came into, I don't know, say not power, but he became the bishop right after the 2002 thing was starting to wade out, and the church here was settling abuse claims and things like that. And he started us kind of on a much more conservative angle and was kind of nationally famous for that. And it caused a lot of division within this diocese of like people who just resented him for doing it and people who were really for him and just so much for him. So in a sense, in internal church politics, he was kind of a poster boy for a conservative church movement, you know. Then one of the guys that he brought into the priesthood, one of his seminarians, has his laptop cleaned or looked at or something by a professional, and the professional,
Like the IT guy at the school,
right,
at the parish school, right?
right, and finds a bunch of photos, right, of I think kids at the school or kids in the parish, and brings it to Finn, and Finn then gets hypothetically independent, but I don't think really independent, like retired law enforcement officer and a lawyer, and says, look at these images and tell me if this is child pornography. And the conclusion was, this is not child pornography, right? It must have been highly suspicious. I think we all must agree that, or he wouldn't have done that, right?
Right.
But at some level, it didn't meet some legal standard child pornography. So instead of Bishop Finn going to the police with something that, quote, was not child pornography, but suspicious, he then removed this priest, put him at a convent and told him not to interact with kids. And time went by, and then I think that priest went to like a kid's birthday party or something, somehow interacted with kids. Bishop Finn was mad, was like, I can't control you, which I don't think bishops can control. They need to give up that idea for controlling people. And then went to the police and said, hey, this is what I got. He's your problem, not my problem. And then they found real child porn, and that priest is in jail. Okay. So there was other problems related to this too. One of the other problems was that the principal at the parish school realized that something was wrong with this priest. And this is a real gray area because like, gray is not the right word, but like, I feel like this is in a lot of things, but particularly in the world of like looking for pedophiles, it's like something rubs you wrong. You know something's wrong. You're seeing behavior that could be grooming, and you're seeing things that don't look right. And you write all that up, but none of that's like a smoking gun. None of that is like hard evidence. All of it's like suspicion, you know, at best, right? So, but the principal of the school, who I think of as a hero in this, wrote a letter saying something's wrong. This priest is not right, you know. And instead of it making to Bishop Finn, somehow some people in the church hierarchy killed that letter. In addition, neither the photos nor that letter went through the normal sex abuse investigation process. The lay people who were supposed to be involved to review these claims or the ombudsman were never involved. So basically, the whole process was circumvented.
And can I say the process, which was largely put in place by Bishop Finn, right?
I mean, the process might have been right before he got here, but it was like he was around because he was here a year even before he became bishop. He certainly knew the process, right? And part of the process was part of a legal settlement of sex abuse. It was like during the legal settlement, some of the victims are like, we're not doing this for us. We're doing this to make sure this never happens again. So you show us that you're never going to do it again. And the church says, well, we are going to introduce this process. Right? So part of the problem with what Bishop Finn did was it actually opened up old lawsuits because now you broke your settlement. You know? which is not all about money, but that's scary too,
Yeah.
and you can't trust the church in settlement,
Yeah.
So in the Bishop Finn case, he ends up getting removed. He ends up a misdemeanor happens that he didn't come forward.
Yeah.
And in a way, like, there's been weird pushback I've heard from people who work for Bishop Finn, from people who are just conservative, who like the direction he was moving things, where they're like, well, he wasn't really that guilty, right?
Yeah.
Or he wasn't, or those pictures weren't really that bad. Well, did you look at those pictures? He thought they were bad enough to bring to like,
Do you want your kid's picture?
Yeah, well, I mean, just obviously Bishop Finn thought he was bad, or he wouldn't have sent the guy to a convent. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of weird kind of political stuff there. And I was thinking about it this morning that it's kind of like, say you have a company, like you're a CEO of a company, and your company is busted for the worst environmental abuse. And then we put in a new CEO. And part of the mandate of that new CEO is, whatever you do, don't hurt the environment, because we have a horrible track record of trying to clean up our environment. And then you do something that kind of hurts the environment.
Yeah.
Like Bishop Finn did. He delayed 6 months in reporting.
Yeah.
Wasn't nearly as bad as the accusations against the church are historically, but it shows, like, are we just a joke? Are we just not serious about reform?
Right.
So within the politics of the church, there's these people who have a hard time thinking Bishop Finn's guilty. There's also this problem of, like, the guy who was accused was one of Bishop Finn's guys. Like, he was a conservative. He was brought into the priesthood by Bishop Finn and ordained by him, right?
Right.
If this had been a very liberal priest that had been accused, would Bishop Finn have given him the same protections?
Mm-hmm.
So all of this hurts us as Catholics sorting through this issue. Like, the political angles on this do not help us solve the problem.
No. And I think, like, a layer is that you hear a lot of conservatives wanting to blame liberals for the problem and vice versa.
Right.
And there is no evidence that there's plenty of evidence that both sides have problems and are guilty. There have been conservative priests, there have been liberal priests.
The conservatives would like to think that this is a homosexuality problem, and that it's liberal permissiveness that's allowing that. And then the liberals would like to think this is a
repression
clericalism problem, and that it's the conservatives that are causing this. And both of these are, and then, like, even saw with McCarrick defending himself in his report, which I think his report's pretty conclusive of guilt. He's like, this is basically a political hit job. I've got enemies in the church. He's using church politics as cover fire.
Yeah.
And I would like to say, in general, I am anti-church politics. Like, you need to be happy that, as long as we all believe in the catechism, you need to be happy that there are people who have different styles of Catholicism.
Yeah.
More or less. They may not have as good a style as you, or whatever you want to say, right? But we need that type of diversity within the church.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we let the politics of, well, he's one of them and he's one of us, we are, like, losing our mission as church. We're no longer evangelizing the world. We're infighting. We're doing stupid things.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that has happened in this whole church sex abuse crisis that Catholics have a hard time seeing clearly because of it.
Yeah.
I'm done with Bishop Finn unless you got more. I would like to talk about Monsignor Rossi next. I think the way we want to label Monsignor Rossi is the strange case of Monsignor Rossi.
Yeah.
All right. So Laura and I...
So can we start out by saying that church has found no evidence of his misconduct? So we're discussing somebody...
Right. We're now discussing a person who has not been removed at all, and who no hard evidence has been found against.
And we're going to try not to gossip.
We're going to try not to gossip, but
yeah,
I think this is a very important thing because I'm not sure the church is doing right here.
Mm-hmm.
So Laura and I both know Monsignor Rossi in passing because he runs the National Shrine. It's this enormous church in Washington, D.C. that's not technically part of the Archdiocese of Washington. It's in this gray area,
mm-hmm.
and he's not a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington. He's a priest from Pennsylvania. And it's on campus of Catholic University, or it adjoins the campus of Catholic University. So lots of students go there. Laura went to Catholic University. I would go there for Mass all the time. You'd often see Monsignor Rossi. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So it exists in a gray area. And I just want to bring up that some of the other accusations, like in the Pennsylvania report, also exist in a gray area. They deal with like people who are a little bit schismatic Catholics. Simple House, I'd say, lives in a gray area. We're not schismatic in any way, but we're a separate 501c3. And if the bishop wanted to shut us down, he can't. It's just not like one of his legal rights, you know?
Yeah.
So with Monsignor Rossi, there was this kind of haboo that there was a widespread belief that he would have sexual improprieties with men, you know, university students, maybe people who worked at the shrine. This was just widely believed, you know, at least in our circles, right? And beyond our circles. There was also an accusation that this other priest who's since been removed from the priesthood said that he would kind of get steered towards certain...
Monsignor Rossi would kind of feed him.
People, right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of not clear that it's sexual harassment in the sense that it's towards an employee. Monsignor Rossi had no official power over seminarians, like he's just a rector at the shrine, you know? So it's not clear it's sexual harassment. It's also not against, the accusations are not against minors. So it could just be sexual impropriety of a priest, that there's this kind of like group of gay priests or gay people in the church who are having these sexual improprieties. And Monsignor Rossi's part of it. That's more or less what the suspicion was, and even is, right? There's still a suspicion amongst many laity that this has happened. So nothing really happens to Monsignor Rossi despite this widespread suspicion. And then at a Theology on Tap, the bishop who replaced Cardinal World, Bishop Gregory, is confronted during the Q&A. Can you say what the question was? I don't remember it right off.
I believe it was just why had he not been investigated in relation to this other priest who was my classmate at CUA going down, you know, because there was a part of his going down included this connection to Monsignor Rossi.
And Bishop Gregory said something to the effect of, that's the first I've heard of it. I'm going to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, well, it seems like he was pretty caught off guard, you know, and he kind of hemmed and hawed a little bit and said, well, this would be rightfully investigated by Scranton, which is his diocese, and then, yes, committed to getting, you know, something to happen about this, right?
And so Bishop Gregory was new to our it was new to DC,
like brand new.
So it's not like it should have been surprising at some level. It's not like he should have already been briefed that there's a little bit of smoke around Monsignor Rossi, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe that there was multiple investigations. Like Laura and I discussed this before. Scranton investigated. We think DC investigated too. Washington Post article said that nothing was found. No one came forward. I think what that means is that they went to look for victims, essentially. They went to look for firsthand evidence of someone who said there was sexual impropriety. They found none, right? And therefore, Monsignor Rossi remains the rector of the shrine to this day, quote, cleared by these investigations.
Right.
The problem with this is, if this was just, you know, homosexual activity amongst priests, I don't know, just defense the people that I said
like
that.
Breaking the vow of celibacy.
If this was breaking the vow of celibacy, of course you're not going to find victims, because like by them coming forward, they're taking themselves down too, you know, and possibly other friends of theirs, right? So you're not going to find people coming forward on this type of thing, right? So there will, in a sense, never be a successful investigation, right? Where you can actually prove something, right?
Yeah. The other possibility is that it is 100% rumors.
Yeah. Okay. All right. You're right. So the two situations we're left with is there's going to never be a successful investigation because it's not in the best interest of anyone who was involved with Rossi to come forward. The other possibility is this is just a rumor mill, and this is the maliciousness of rumors surrounding it. My problem at the end of the day is this undercuts his ability to be pastor.
Yeah.
Right. Like
his ability to be pastor is the credibility is gone. No matter, there's no way, right? It's just gone.
Because there's a lot of people who highly suspect that this is all true, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm not saying they've got bad grounds for that suspicion either,
Mm-hmm.
and yet we're forcing him. There's the part of the attitude problem that needs to change. And this is my big critique. I would like to say this forcefully.
Yeah.
You do not have a right to be a pastor. You do not have a right to your career in the church, right?
Yeah.
There is no right to be a spiritual leader.
And you are a servant of the church. You are laying your life down for the church, and that is your job until the day you die, to lay your life down for the church.
Right. If you cannot perform your duty, even because of gossip, go do another duty. Go be a contemplative. Go pray for the church. Go find something else you can do. Go work, unselfishly in some other role. It feels like we act like Rossi has a right to be rector of the shrine, and until he's proven guilty, he gets to be rector of the shrine. That is so wrong. That is not a public trust. That is not spiritual leadership. That is just a wrong-headed way of managing the church.
Right.
Warren and I are in agreement on this.
I couldn't be more in agreement.
I also wish we had someone here to present the other side, but
there is no other side, Clark. No,
okay.
I agree with you fully.
So we're calling it the strange case of Monsignor Rossi, and neither of us know necessarily that he's guilty, but we both think that he should no longer be rector of the shrine.
Right. And I don't know who he's accountable to, like a board of directors of the shrine or...
Right. I really... It's almost like, like this happens in every other career. Like if you're a football coach and you either lose the football team or lose the faith of the boosters or the fans hate you, you're just no longer the football coach.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't make sense for you to be a football coach,
Yeah.
And you haven't committed any crime at all, but that's what the situation is here. Yet the church continues to operate like it's a career right to this guy, All right. Next thing. When the Pennsylvania diocese or grand jury report came out, I think you could argue that maybe this report wasn't that useful because it really didn't dig up that much that wasn't done in the Boston scandal,
Yeah, it just gave like greater detail in some cases. Right.
I would say the biggest difference between it and Boston was that it actually just published a bunch of blow-by-blow sex abuse accounts, right? Yeah. Which could be useful. I don't want us to shy away from anything that's true, but also just traumatizing to read about,
Yeah.
And maybe not necessary to institute a reform. But one of the worries about the Pennsylvania thing was that, you can do this in all 50 states. I don't think you're going to learn anything dramatically new by doing it, but you could just this could go on for a decade where you just traumatize the church every state, kind of unfairly in the sense that you're not also doing it to public schools, also doing it to the Boy Scouts, also doing it to all these other institutions, right? Fortunately, since then, it feels like the news cycle's moved on from this. But I'd say there was a solid year where it seemed like that could happen.
Yeah, but sadly, I know people who don't go to church because of this anymore. And it's like this followed by coronavirus.
I was mad at my friends who were really shocked by the grand jury report because I was kind of like, they were old enough to be adults, like maybe they're in college age when the Boston stuff broke.
Yeah.
And I was like, did you not take seriously what the Boston stuff was? Like, there's nothing we're learning here that's that new.
Yeah.
And I was kind of mad that they hadn't, and some of them admitted that they just weren't sure the Boston thing was true. They thought it was a little bit of a witch hunt. And it was like, you weren't really paying attention then. Now you're paying attention, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of like it for that reason. I see no reason why all 50 states should do it.
Yeah. Actually, one important thing of it is that it seems like the reforms in the church have largely worked. So let's make sure we are keeping up with those reforms, and let's have every diocese periodically make sure, that they, that the reforms are good, that they are adequate, and making sure that people are but now let's open up every other institution, because we don't want child abuse in our country, Right. Yeah.
Let's also talk about the international implications of this, because some of this has come out in Ireland. I've seen some things. Germany. Yeah. The Pope's gotten involved, Pope Francis and Pope Benedict at different levels with different organizations trying to clean this up. I'm really worried that this could be a huge international problem because there's many places that are operating at a very disorganized level in the church. I'm thinking like about 20 years ago, I met a guy named Father John Kerwin. The reason why I met him was Michael Kerwin, right?
Mhm.
He's absolutely no relation, but he has exactly the same name as Michael Kerwin's dad, John Kerwin. So Father John Kerwin and Michael's dad became like pen pals or something, right? Just because they had the exact same name, right? So when John Kerwin came to the States, he came by the Catholic Worker House and I got to hang out with him, just based on the dumb name association there. But it was neat.
Yeah.
And he was an Irishman and he spent his whole career in the Congo. And it was literally his first time leaving the Congo like in 30 years. So he was this Irishman, doing his ministry there as a priest, and he was kind of the bishop's secretary for most of his ministry.
Mhm.
So he was kind of like, running herd on the other priests and things, but never being the bishop himself, right? And he said that they had problems that like with their kind of like most far-flung out in the bush priests, that they'd like not just be married, they'd have two wives.
Yeah.
And it was like that the bishop would try to artfully like manage that and try to like not like alienate everyone and try to get that guy in line and try to get him to not shack up with women and stuff like this, right? And it's like, if you're running a diocese at that level of disorder, which I'm not blaming that bishop, that's kind of, he inherited that too, right?
Yeah.
And it is traditional in that area to have multiple wives. They don't necessarily traditionally see any problem with that. And they just don't seem to understand celibacy, right? So it's like, if that's happening, child abuse is happening.
Right.
If they can't keep a handle on that, they can't keep a handle on that.
And we're, in developed countries, we can't keep a handle on like child abuse and sexual violence, right? And we know that in developing, I don't know. A lot of developing countries have there's a lot more sexual violence, and a lot more abuse, to a much greater degree, so
like we're trying to manage it, and there's whole parts of the world not even trying to manage it.
Yeah.
That reminds me, my other story was I was down in Central America, and there was an American priest there who was kind of on assignment, and he was just so demoralized because he knew of sex abuse happening within families, like out in the parish, and the community knew, and no one would take any action, and it didn't matter what he said, and it was just like, and it was just like he's sitting there kind of dying because he's like trying to spiritually lead these people, and it was also an area where the drug gangs were very prominent.
Yeah.
It was a very dark kind of area. Like I remember driving around the city and I felt very unsafe because just people standing at this, like when we went through small towns in Central America, kids are playing, people are laughing, eye contact's being made. And then we're in this town, which is like a mid-sized town. And like people waiting for the bus are all looking at the ground and don't dare look at you, when you drive by. Right. And it's just like scary. You just realize that death is somehow in this community,
There's like a movie from the 90s that's like that, and you think it's an exaggeration. I can't remember. Anyway.
I went to KU, Lawrence, Kansas, right? And people make a lot of eye contact and smile at strangers all the time. And then I remember going to this like academic conference in New York City, and like I was weirding New Yorkers out, like on subway. Like really weirding them out. Like what was wrong with you? What was I up to by the way I was behaving? So well, cool. Do you have any more to add about that? I'm just worried that this international problem could be 50 years from now when it finally comes out, where they start trying to
Right. So we're going to be dealing with this for a long time. As far as the church in the U.S., reading this report is horrible. And I, also feel hopeful that it's not going to be a major cultural part of the church, in the coming years. I think we're tackling the problem, and I'm hopeful for the church in the U.S.
That was my takeaway too.
More is needed, and it will require, generation after generation.
But my
it's
sense,
a human problem. Yeah,
that's right. Because it's I think you're saying that correctly. I thought my first takeaway from the Pennsylvania report was I really hate reading instances of child sex abuse, like just period. It doesn't matter what church or not church it involves. But
my takeaway was the way that they thought that it was pre-2002 was the main issue kind of matched my own expectation. And that actually was good news to me because I was like, okay, somebody else who tried to pull back the curtain for us came to the same conclusion I already had, that we had a reform. It's been a largely successful reform.
Yeah.
And anybody who tells you it wasn't a problem before 2002, I think is completely out of touch, you know. And anybody who says it's currently a problem, I would listen to for a minute, but I'd be skeptical, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always going to be a human problem, but I think right now we do have the right systems in place.
Yeah.
And if there was a little bit more systems in the church for like fitness reviews and things like that of priests, I don't think that'd be a bad thing.
No.
I don't know how you theologically justify it or something. And we also have a priest shortage, so we're kind of hesitant to like even remove priests who are just bad managers or just not doing a good job in general, but aren't scandalous. Yeah. But I don't know that a fitness review type process wouldn't help the church.
Sure. Yeah. And always, I think things coming to the light, it's what we should want.
Right.
You know.
All right. Well, God bless you. Thank you, Laura.
All right. You too.
And we're gonna. This is our last of the very difficult sex abuse podcast.
Yeah. We'll do something good next time.
I'm glad we talked about it though.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think all Catholics are not talking about it, are not taking it super seriously. And I think you have to know that this is what the public perception is, you know, and you need to know the answers, and you need to know for your own sake what happened and what's been reformed. Yeah. So that's our goal here. And I hope that you got a pretty good summary by listening to our podcast.
Yeah. All right.
See
you later, Clark.